The primary purpose of Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. They are not necessarily the views of Special School District of St. Louis County.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Innovative AAC Solutions. I'm Bridget Solberg.
Hey, I'm Laura Hayes.
And we wanted to say welcome. We hope that your school year is going well, up and running, and we're going to dive into another episode on Gestalt Language Processing and specifically how it works in the classroom. So Laura, what's something that you have noticed that our Gestalt language processors really benefit from in the classroom?
If anybody did not tune in, definitely tune in last week to the interview where Emily and I sat down and we just talked through some really rich examples of what you might see. I think that specifically in the classroom, just thinking through what it can look like with our AAC users, right? We mentioned this a little bit, but how they're using media, how you might hear them using gestalts or what we might call scripts from their favorite media sources or from favorite people that they've heard. I just had a classroom the other day where we were talking about, they're like, how do you know she's a GLP? And I said, well, because of the rich intonation that I hear. Like, yes, she's repeating things, but if you listen, she has a nice, almost sing-songy tone and prosody to her, how she's using sounds. And so those were all like, yes, definitely a GLP. Anything you would add? What are you seeing?
As far as identifying GLPs, I would say I totally agree with you. And then as far as that practical application piece, I would say recognizing who these kids are is the biggest hurdle that our teams, need to first identify them. And then secondly, incorporating the modeling from their perspective and really making it sticky enough so that they are grasping onto these gestalts. So, leaning into those special interests and also incorporating enough pause and wait time. I'd say those are two big ones.
Yeah. And I think that you had a key there, making sure that it's individualized in the sense of in those early stages, right? We as clinicians have been trained for so long to this is what we work on, and this is the path to get to sentences and grammar. And it's so nuanced for our Gestalt language processor. So that can feel like a really tough change, a tough shift for the communication partners working with them. But I know someone else who has some ideas about what Gestalt language processing can look like in a classroom. Do you know who I'm talking about, Bridget?
I sure do. I had the pleasure of interviewing Katelyn Kelps. She is a school-based speech-language pathologist since 2015, and she works in the schools and in a private practice specializing in AAC systems, Gestalt language processing, executive functioning, and neurodiversity affirming intervention. So I think that we're all going to learn a wealth of knowledge from Katelyn, and let's roll into the episode. Hi, welcome to another episode. Katelyn, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I am Katelyn Kelps. I am a school-based and private practice speech-language pathologist, working mostly within the neurodiversity affirming care realm with a really big focus on Gestalt language processing and AAC.
Well, welcome. Can you tell us a quick overview about Gestalt language processing and AAC, especially how it applies to the classroom?
Absolutely. So within the classroom setting, I think right now, especially with GLP, it's so new that it's a lot of education for teachers and paraprofessionals, even within building staff. Of this kid didn't say hi to me in the hallway. It's so funny. Every time I say hi to them, I say, hi, Johnny, and they say, hi, Johnny, back. Things like that. I think right now we're at a huge education stage as a whole in terms of like special education within the schools and kind of making that more well known. I personally got 2 brand new classrooms to me this year or this last year. One of the teachers was pretty well versed in Gestalt language processing, and the other was a little bit of like a naysayer. And so I think in terms of being a professional, because I think sometimes teachers have heard about it before speech paths even, or things like that. It kind of depends on what social media I think you're kind of digesting and what professional developments you're digesting and things like that on who hears it before the other person. Um, but just kind of keeping that in mind of like some people have never heard of it. And so even though they might come off as like a little bit of a naysayer, they just need a little bit of time to digest that. And sometimes I think it's the same with AAC. When I get a brand new teacher who's never really had an AAC device, it's kind of the same thing. Um, so kind of making sure always like that they're accessible, we're teaching, we're modeling within the classroom for both of those, or the combined GLP AAC user and things like that.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for all educational staff to be on the same page, whether it's, we're addressing these IEP goals or we're supporting these kids through these techniques, that,
Absolutely.
Nobody is kind of like the keeper of the knowledge, that we all have the knowledge, that we can all start from square one together, especially we know that there's a constant revolving door in some of these education classrooms. Yeah.
Both any of our complex communicators, I'm going to throw GLPs in to that kind of descriptor, right? Like then we're looking at their seating and positioning with PT. We're looking at their sensory with OT and their fine motor. So it's kind of the same thing of like that whole child approach. Really, we can't make communication accessible unless everyone's really on that same page. That was a good point.
What do you do as the classroom SLP to help get people on the same page?
I always start the year with a professional development of kind of what, I don't know the best way to word this, almost like what my expectations are of kind of this is how, even with this is how I want to interact with you guys and the team member that I want to be. So I include paraprofessionals in that. I want you guys to come and tell me, hey, Johnny said this to me today. Isn't that so great? I've never heard him say that, and kind of share those wins. Or I've had some really great paraprofessional relationships where they're emailing me and being like, hey, this happened today. I know you're not in the building, but next time it happens, how do you want me to respond to it? Which is fantastic. And that's really like the ideal relationship and teaming that should happen. It doesn't always, but I think really making yourself accessible is how I kind of navigate that within the school setting. So starting with a training to kind of get that information out there, that research out there, resources out there. So I do training. I provide some free things that they could do on their own if they're, some of our coworkers are going to be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to learn everything. So making that more accessible to them. And then what I do is the first week and a half, 2 weeks of school, I don't actually really follow a schedule yet. And I am just in the classroom modeling those concepts while they're fresh in their mind of kind of, this is what we just learned about. Katelyn's now showing me what it could look like within the classroom, kind of how it's doable. Because I think a lot of times too, when we're talking about something that people aren't familiar with, they panic. And they're like, this does not sound like something I can do on top of teaching math, on top of teaching reading, and not realizing that it all actually goes together. So when we get in and show them rather than just kind of talk to them, but still giving them that base, I think is important of like that training versus coaching model.
Yeah, so that we're all on the same page. They've seen you in the classroom doing it, and then they can apply it themselves. No, I think that's a great three-prong approach. What would be some specific supports that you would want to see incorporated? And how could those be different for like different grade levels and different stages within GLP?
Yeah, so even though for GLPs, we don't want to just kind of do like blanket language modeling, I think within the schools, it's a little bit different. And I think that this is something we don't necessarily talk about enough, but we have to go back to like the paraprofessional and teacher perspective and like what's on their plate. We are asking paraprofessionals to do so much that if I said for Johnny, you're going to model these 15 gestalts, for Susie, you're going to model these 10, and they were all different, there's zero chance of that actually happening. And realistically, I totally understand that. In a perfect world, we are individualizing everything for our GLPs. But it's not perfect.
I think that's where therapy comes in.
Yes, absolutely. So what I do is I do provide. So I have like big posters on the wall of things like for transitions. Here are things you can model. For math, here are things you can model. And what I actually do is I do a T-chart. So on one side, it's spoken models, and on the other, I do, so if my classroom, and I know this doesn't always work great, we have a lot of different systems within the classroom, but if I have 5 touch chat users and only 1 lamp users, I'm going to just throw the touch chat symbols on there too and navigation pathways. So that way we can kind of see some different things because everybody needs visuals.
Right.
So I'm a big visuals fan. I will because even my GLPs still have a core board on their desk because we still want to make that robust language, and not that a core board is robust language, but kind of just that model
piece. Yeah.
Yes. Everyone has a core board on their desk that matches their system or is just something accessible. And I will even, if a student is really working on language for transitioning, then I might kind of go and put a little marker dot on where and go to kind of help the staff in the classroom kind of, again, get that trigger like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be modeling for this child. Or if they're working on protesting, then I'm kind of marking all of the protesting words. I also love in the Target dollar spot for back to school, they always have those little sticky labels, like pouches. And so I always get the square ones, and I will slap those on kids' desks with the language models that staff could be kind of modeling and focusing on. And I like to do it that way because then when we're shifting language, it's really easy to pull that old one out and slide a new kind of cheat sheet in.
Yeah. No, I think that's great when you have multiple approaches. So it sounds like you have posters, you have individualized desk supports, and then, breaking it down even to those core boards on the desk themselves, and just helping with that location finding, because that can be a barrier when somebody doesn't feel familiar with that particular system, for sure.
Absolutely.
So what would be some challenges or threats to making language accessible for students who use who are GLP in the classroom?
I think a lot of this goes back to people not understanding or having the education around one or both of kind of those topics of GLP and AAC, and then putting them together, I think is mind-blowing. So when we're teaching about GLP a lot, we're saying that they are auditory learners and they hear things and then pick it up. And then all of a sudden I'm saying, I want you to model with symbols. And it kind of clashes. And they're like, well, now you're talking both ways. And I don't understand. So I think that education piece is always a barrier, because again, as I'm sitting here saying, I'm doing trainings and I'm coaching, I also always want to point out that I kind of live the ideal world where I have a smaller caseload within my school district because I support so many classrooms on my caseload that have GLPs and AAC users. And I know that not all school districts do that. So I kind of live the ideal world where I have this time to train and things and be in the classroom, but not all speech paths do. So like that timing, that education, but then we're kind of looking too at something that I realized has really been a barrier for my GLPs is like that peer interaction piece also. And that when we have students When we send our GLPs to Gen Ed, they're getting so many great natural language models. Our AAC users are getting so many great language models. When maybe they are in their resource room or pulled out for service, for like maybe some academic services and things, they're no longer getting like that language rich modeling, like natural modeling. They're getting the academic modeling. They're getting, and then if we have students in classrooms with all other GLPs and AAC users who are maybe still developing their skills, where everything kind of, we're creating those opportunities, we're doing great things. They're not getting the natural peer language that we say that we love for all of our students. And so I see as much as we are attempting to model that language, it's not the same from an adult. I can't keep up with what the 8-year-olds are saying. I can't keep up with the high school. I cannot keep up with the high schoolers and all of the new slang and things. And so I think like making sure we're creating those opportunities to kind of overcome that barrier, I think is huge. Whether it's even as a speech path, maybe you go to gym with them or you're headed out to recess to even just listen to them be able to model some of that language too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I did want to interject for our listeners who are feeling overwhelmed, like feel free to reach out to your OGCOM facilitator and we can help either with you having that PD inside of your classroom and we can kind of help facilitate that so that you have a moment to speak to your staff and give you some kind of just background stuff that we might have available. And then we can also come in and do professional development with the team as well. And then the other thing I wanted to say too is certain schools and certain programming has those like best buddies clubs. And I feel like that could be a really fun way to kind of target that special teen slang or get those kids involved and get them playing and having those natural communication moments together. And then as, you know, professionals, whether you as the SLP can attend it or the special educator, paraprofessional, whoever it may be, just kind of jotting notes of I'm hearing this slang or I'm hearing these words so that if your schedule doesn't allow for it, that it's still something that can get relayed to you as that.
Sometimes I would even like take my plan in the hallway. So this last year I was in a kindergarten hallway and I had a lot of kindergarten students. So I would just go like sit at a table when I knew like teachers had their doors open and I would just like listen while I was planning even and like I would hear like silly kid things, even like I gotta go to the bathroom. No one's saying like, can I go to the bathroom, please? In kindergarten. Or I got a potty is like my favorite that I heard because I did it a few days in a row. And in all 3 of the kindergarten classrooms, that's exactly how it went. So that's how I started modeling for GLPs, like to go to the bathroom was I got a potty, and multiple times because that's what 5-year-olds do.
Right. Yeah.
So even like getting creative with, and granted, not every planning time. Sometimes you need the printer, sometimes
you need quiet and focus. Yeah.
Yes. But every once in a while trying to just kind of change your scenery even to hear that language. So sometimes I'd even go sit in the library of the school where it like kind of ebbs and flows, but like you have kids walking by or things like that, just to hear some of that language too.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about like work duty when I would have to be in the cafeteria or drop off just to have like a little note in my phone app. Lean down.
Just those really intonation rich phrases that we hear kids say that might stick for some of our GLPs.
What would be an ideal classroom setup for GLPs and OGCOM users? If you could like create that ideal setup, what would you include?
Space for movement is probably my number one. Granted, that one's so hard in schools.
It's challenging, but we can use the hallway. We can go into gym class. We can go to the playground, right?
In one of my classrooms, there wasn't a ton of space. We had a lot of equipment going on. So even like the way that you utilize your individual schedules for kids, is there a way that we can have them manipulating pieces that get them up and moving?
Yeah, I'm a
or
big fan of scattering things.
yes, that's what I was gonna say. We even, so I've done it too, where this center, like they all have kind of where the kids are checking in with their schedule pieces, all have the same background, but maybe at this center it's higher. So maybe they have to reach a little bit to kind of get on their toes a little bit or things like that. Then maybe some are down low, so they have to kind of bend over. Um, and of course, making it accessible for maybe our students in wheelchairs or things like that too, and keeping that in mind. But doing things like that can even build in some of that movement that a lot of our kids need, um, without having like a whole dedicated space to gross
I'm a
motor
big
within the
fan of
classroom.
tapping into your OT,
Yeah.
because a lot of times they have ideas about, oh yeah, we'll just crawl through a tunnel. Okay, that's
Great.
easy. That doesn't take up that much space.
Yep.
It's not changing my therapy that much.
No.
And they're willing to loan me
Yeah.
equipment for an occasional session or two.
Yep. It's wonderful. Always make friends with your OTs and PTs.
Mm.
Um, visuals everywhere is always and again, I think my ideal classroom setup, and this kind of comes back to like my responsibility of like those staff visuals. But I even say that for teachers too, when teachers are like, my paraprofessionals are just not doing what I want them to do. And I'm like, do you have a visual? And they're like, what? I'm like, do you have a visual? Because again, we all need visuals. You are asking them to remember so much information. They're trying to remember changing schedules, feeding schedules, accommodations, goal, like there's just too much. Write it down, write everything down. Whether it's student specific, whether it's wherever your TAs kind of keep their things of like a schedule or something and posting it there. Um, so that's always like one of when I start with a new classroom, almost like the like audit check that I do when I go in and I'm kind of like helping out is I'm looking for the visuals and the staff supports.
Yeah, and it's funny you say audit check. That's what we call a universal check in our district. So you get
Yeah.
kind of like bonus points for having it all there.
Yep.
And everybody can do their job so much more discreetly defined, knowing what the expectation is. So I feel like that's important to have it written down so that there's not that wiggle room of I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to be doing, so I did nothing.
Yes. And I can't help but kind of put this plug in within being a neurodiversity affirming professional. But like we don't know what supports our coworkers actually need. Neurodivergent people are around us every day and they don't have to disclose that. We can't see it. So adding kind of like that universal design for learning is so important for adults also. Like I need things written down. You can tell me it in the hallway, I will forget. There's zero chance of me remembering that. I used to never tell people that. And then I was like, this is silly because now everyone's mad at me because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. But really, it's because they don't know that when you pass me in the hall, you can't say, hey, I need another core board and I'm going to remember. So I think just keeping that in mind of like, we know our students' eligibilities and their accommodations. We don't necessarily know our coworkers. And so that's where using kind of some of the same strategies of writing things down, using visuals, posting reminders everywhere, making sure I too, like when I meet this last year, I was meeting with a lot of other speech paths in my district to kind of help coach some of the GLP stuff, and concepts and things and therapy. I would always follow up with an email. Like, these are things we talked about, mostly for me, but if it helped them too, great. So I just that nice little plug because I think it's always important to kind of remind ourselves that neurodivergent students become neurodivergent adults.
Right. And I love what our district says is if you can be anything, be inclusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would be additional opportunities for growth or learning if a listener wanted to learn more about this topic?
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of free courses out there now. So Meaningful Speech has a free masterclass. I know that.
And I'm going to plug that as if you're an SLP or teacher in the classroom and you want everybody to start the year on the same page, that masterclass can help get everybody on the same page. You don't have to do the entire hour for every single person in the room, but if you go through and you thoughtfully choose, you know, maybe it's 30 minutes of the masterclass, maybe it's 45 minutes, whatever time allows, that could be a really good, quick and easy on you as a staff member starting place to help people know what that foundational level of Gestalt language processing is.
Yes, it's only an hour-ish. And I know for my district, what we do too is the last 30 minutes is kind of what we present. So the first 30 minutes is a little bit more, it's not research heavy because it's pretty like layman's terms still,
digestible.
But it's still a little overwhelming in terms of research for someone who's brand new, I feel like, who maybe might be resistant to learning. So the last 30 minutes is more of like those actionable steps is what we have kind of found, and kind of starting halfway through and doing the last half of like, here's what you're going to do in the classroom. So I might kind of review what Gestalt language processing is in 5 minutes rather than 30, and then dip into those actionable steps. I think is a good way if you have teams that maybe get a little bit more overwhelmed, and then providing them with the link. So if they want, they can go back and watch it again.
Or you can always, you know, do that come August, September, have a follow-up session in October where you show the first 30 minutes. And then that way you're having a kind of follow-up discussion.
That's a great idea. I know, I think it's Connections Speech Pathology. That might not be the Instagram handle and website and things. It's her first name's Nicole. Now I can't think. But she just also came out. I don't know if it's a one-time thing or if she'll have it available, but a free masterclass as well. And that one's really geared more towards parents, from my understanding, which is, I think, in terms of language modeling, which I think is nice to kind of present to teachers and things also. Because again, it's more of those actionable steps. Well,
so great. How appreciative would most parents be if you, as an SLP, just shot them an email, hey, check this out if you're interested.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important as speech pathologists, as educators and things, to kind of dip into those parent resources for our colleagues. And say, like, some of these examples aren't going to be applicable because they're in the home. But I just think that parent courses and the way that professionals approach parent courses should be the way that we approach a lot of like basic introductory level courses for professionals as well. They seem so much more like warm and welcoming, and like you can make mistakes, and a lot of times in professional courses we don't get that warm and fuzzy like encouragement. And so I always think that that's important, of like, you're gonna make mistakes and that's okay.
Yeah, everybody who's quote unquote an expert is a beginner at one point. It is all right. Yeah.
Yes. And then there's 1.5 million podcasts out there to kind of learn from. There's so many different ways to kind of digest information these days that it's almost overwhelming. I use caution when saying like using social media, only because I think that you need to be very aware of, like, there's some times that I'll be like down a Gestalt language or AAC rabbit hole, and then all of a sudden I get to an account that seems like they have a lot of followers and is not aligned with my philosophy at all. So if you were just dipping your toes into these topics, you may not realize that some of the things out there on social media for these topics don't necessarily align with the research or things like that. So I think
it's a highlight reel.
Yes. And I'm on social media.
And it's not vetted either. So
no, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be cautious and conscientious and critical consumers. So for sure, like the reputable ones to follow.
Yeah.
Totally fine. But then I mean, it is a slippery slope where you can find some like you were saying, not aligned accounts. Sure.
Yeah.
So you said you're off social media?
I'm on social media, so that's why it's funny for me to like say things like that.
No, I think it's
But I think
important.
that's always important too, is to kind of disclose, like, I do have, it's kind of a mix of like speech, my life, whatever,
Yeah,
Instagram, but I think it's important for people to also hear that someone who's sharing information about Gestalt language processing and AAC on Instagram is also saying that it's a highlight reel, and
yeah,
to use caution when consuming that information. Because I know even like sometimes I'll look back on posts and be like, well, wish I didn't word it that way. And things like that.
definitely. Yeah, we're only human, and
Yes.
you
And I
know,
think looking, if you want to consume information on social media to learn about things, looking for the accounts that kind of own up to those mistakes and things is always a good clue too, of this is someone maybe that I can trust, because if even if they put out something that they didn't realize wasn't best practice or things like that, I can kind of trust that maybe they're going to come back once they find out and share that mistaken information.
yeah, yeah, I think that's all good points. And, start with those master classes, maybe
Mhm.
dip your toes into podcasts. And then if you're interested, you can always go the social media route. I do feel like there can be really helpful things
Mhm.
about all three different, avenues to explore
Yes.
those. And then I would also just say that, like, if you're interested in like the journal article aspect of it, feel free to reach out to your OdCom facilitator and we can kind of cherry pick those journal articles, not in the sense that like we're only choosing things that support what we're saying, but we have access to those articles and can maybe help funnel them to you. If you're a clinician in the classroom, you don't have necessarily all the time in the world for that. So just let us know. And then we like to end our podcast with one final question to all of our guests, and that's, can you share a favorite AAC moment with an AAC user?
Absolutely. And I'm going to pick one that also dips into that Gestalt
Love it.
piece. And a little background, I had a student who came with me, it came to me with no AAC, saying the word shoes, and that was about it. And very quickly I learned that shoes was one of those stuck single words. So it was a single word. It sounded like a label, but it held so much more meaning. So it was anything related to shoes, and a lot of times it was my feet hurt because their shoes didn't fit. So it wasn't like we would look at the shoe and be like, it's tied, there's nothing in the shoe. And then finally I was like feeling it and I was like, shoe, or I know it was, his shoes were off and he stepped on something and said shoe. I was like, oh my poor baby. um, but we got him AAC. He's uses AAC now to just kind of support that spoken language. He's really come a long way in his language development. So he was one of our GLPs where his like articulation and motor planning just didn't quite support the gestalts that he wanted to say yet. But my favorite is, for like a week, he just kept saying, you're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome. I was like, I don't know what that means. And I was just very upfront. I said, I'm so sorry. I said, I don't know what that's from, and I don't know what you're trying to tell me. And I think at the time, this student was maybe in first grade. So I think a lot of times people don't think to be like, I don't know. And I had tried like repeating it back and those kind of strategies to acknowledge his language, and they just were not working. It was actually making him more frustrated. And as soon as I was like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me, he went and got a Maui doll from Moana.
Oh,
And I can't quite remember exactly what he was trying to communicate now because it was a few years ago. But that's just what sticks out to me, is like that extra step of creative communication with our GLPs sometimes. Sometimes it's okay to just be honest and be like, I don't know.
show me.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
then
went and got
some
the
of those
doll and
kids
like put it
can.
down and
Yeah,
then like made him dance on the desk. And I was like, this is great.
fun show for you, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it was amazing.
Oh, I love it. I love
Yeah.
hearing those stories. And that's the reason why we get up in the morning and do the job
hmm
that we do. Help kind of unlock that communication piece for our
Yes,
students.
and I can't help but like plug then too when we're programming devices and things for GLPs, of like making sure we keep things accessible, keeping the whole system intact, but then putting gestalts and things where maybe they make sense to the meaning, because we also don't know what they're picking up. So I had never really taught this student "you were welcome" when it's associated with Moana. I think I would have even put it with like movies and things,
Yeah.
but they're taking in so much. So he was just exploring one day and found "you're welcome," and it triggered that memory for him. And he remembered it was on the social page, like amazing things. Like he taught himself that, which I think is just amazing and a great, like, presuming competence.
Absolutely. No, I love that story. And like you said, just highlighting that all of our students have that drive and want to communicate within them. And it's just a matter of us helping them access it and
Mhm.
supporting them with outcomes. So thank
Absolutely.
you so much for joining us today.
For having
It's been
me.
a pleasure to have you on here. Thanks again, Katelyn, and we will see you next time.
So for this week's innovative activity, I have a fun and kind of unique one. In the IRC, we have themed boxes. I don't know if you've seen these, but I grabbed one of them, and this is the dinosaur one. It has so much fun stuff that I think anybody that you work with that is a dinosaur lover, but let's say a GLP AAC user, I might really appreciate. So this box has a bunch of different things. All the boxes are a little bit different. This one has all kinds of actual dinosaur figurines. So all different shapes and sizes, about, I don't know, 10 to 15 dinosaurs, two puppets, two puppets, a Triceratops puppet, and I think it's a Brachiosaurus puppet. And then these fun stamps, these foam stamps with a stamp pod, all dinosaurs. And then last but not least, this little concentration dinosaur game. So here's how I might model, depending upon what language stage you find your GLP AAC user in, how I might model some language around that different stage. The first stage being potential gestalts. So things like, it's a scary one. He's so big. He's coming to get you, or he's gonna stomp. I don't like him. He's scary. Um, let me see. He's gonna eat whatever he's gonna eat. He's gonna eat you. He's gonna eat the little dinosaur. We're pushing these stamps down. Let's get more. So that would be stage one, around these fun, meaningful experiences. Stage two would be mixing and matching and shortening that. So it's a big one, it's a scary one, he's climbing, he's sleeping, he's running, he's so scary. Gotta get out of here. Gotta get more, gotta eat, whatever we're mixing and matching things that we've already heard them say. And again, don't forget that we want a variety of language functions. So where's he going? What's he do? Where's he going? What's next? What's happening? Where's the little one? Where's his food? And then if we're diving into stage three, we're going to start referencing things, right? So I love these, is we could do body parts, nose, horns, little eyes, soft fur. If we're doing this concentration game, that would be a great one, right? So turning over the cards and talking about either the colors, the sizes, or just the body parts of the dinosaurs or the names of the dinosaurs themselves. Um, and then beyond, right? So lots of versatility here. I feel like we could really stick with this themed box for a really, really long time, particularly if this is a special interest for your GLP AAC user. So they have all different types of themed boxes. The dinosaurs was just the ones I grabbed. There's pets, there's growing things, definitely something that can be for all different ages too. So check these out. They're in the IRC, or make your own. And just model language around what language stage you feel like they're in.